We begin tonight with me in this chair. Yes, I am back. And very grateful to my dear friends Jason Johnson and Tiffany Cross for holding down the bridge of the Readout Enterprise for 2 whole weeks, the 2 weeks that I flew away for my little writing retreat. And you know what? It turns out I can't leave y'all alone for 1 day, let alone 2 weeks, without all hell breaking loose. Literally. There was the FBI searching Mar-a-Lago on day 1. Polio in New York on like day 3. I mean, apparently I need to stay here to keep y'all out of trouble. But real talk, now that I am here and all caught up, I have questions. Because it is not, shall we say, normal for a president of the United States to pack up boxes of classified top secret material and ferry them off to his private residence. That is just not normal. And the excuses that Trump's Republican sycophants are offering for what he did, well,
haven't seen any evidence that he was even that Trump was even asked to give these documents back. Do any of us really believe that Donald Trump is like reading his nuclear secrets on his bedside at night? Like
now, they want to make him responsible for having taken classified documents and preserved them.
Every former president has access to their documents. It's how they write their memoirs.
Okay, so here's the thing about presidential records, something Trump and his posse cannot seem to understand. They belong not to Trump or to any president. They belong to the American people, to you. They are literally and legally the property of the U.S. government, which is why the National Archives and Records Administration, known as NARA, assumed exclusive legal and physical custody of the Obama presidential records when President Obama left office in 2017. The agency said that about 30 million pages of unclassified records went to a National Archives facility in the Chicago area. Classified Obama presidential records are in a facility in the D.C. area, which leads to this building. This is the future home of the Obama Presidential Library in Chicago, Illinois. There will be lots of exhibits in this gorgeous building, historic images of our first black first family, plenty on Obamacare, a.k.a. the Affordable Care Act, a.k.a. a BFD, and certainly displays on DACA and on the day our troops got Osama bin Laden, that kind of thing. You know, it won't be in there? Classified materials. Ditto on the libraries for Lyndon Johnson and the Reagan and Bush libraries and the Carter Library. Can I show you this book? You see this book? Thick book. It's so heavy you could probably hurt a man with this book. This is President Obama's memoir. He wrote this humongous book with probably like an army of researchers who could go through his presidential records. And without taking home, wait for it, classified materials. Because presidents do not just get to like take home the UFO files when they leave office. Okay, here's a joke that you can use with your friends. You know what you call a person who used to be the president of the United States? A regular, ordinary citizen. Former presidents have no special powers or privileges, and all the laws that apply to you apply to them. In no way does Donald Trump have the right to have any of that presidential material in his personal possession instead of in the National Archives. It is literally illegal. So my questions are twofold. Why did he take this stuff? For what purpose? I mean, Michael Cohen, who used to work for Trump, has speculated that he was using it as kind of like an insurance policy, like this mob style, you come after me, Justice Department, and I release the nuke details to Putin or MBS. Now, I wrote a book about Trump called The Man Who Sold America, in case you care to check it out. And based on like the Trump insiders that I talked to, one could easily argue that he's just ignorant and thinks that everything in the White House, classified or not, belongs to him personally, because he thinks the American president's job is just like Putin's. I mean, was he going to sell it to the Saudis or the Kremlin for like Jared-style billions? I mean, who knows? But we do need to know why. And the next question, which we will get to in a bit later with the great Lawrence tribe, is what are the consequences? Because don't there need to be consequences? But let us start with the what and the why. And my wonderful team has assembled a really great team of guests to do that. So joining me now are Luke Broadwater, congressional reporter for the New York Times, and Tim O'Brien, senior executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion. Thank you both for being here. And Luke Broadwater, I'm going to start with you because there's a ton of new information. Like Trump has now filed this motion. He's filed a motion to ask a judge to appoint a special master to review the materials. He kind of wants to sort of push back on them taking it. But there is sort of reporting to understand about the way that these documents wound up in Mar-a-Lago. What can you tell us about the process that happened before the documents went from where they were supposed to be to where they wound up?
Sure. It was, in fact, a long process. And, Donald Trump has said repeatedly, well, why didn't they just ask before them? I would have given them to them. But the government has said repeatedly that they engaged in negotiations for some time to get these documents back. And in fact, of course, they got those 15 boxes back some time ago. But the key thing here, I think, is something that happens in June when the Trump legal team offers up a signed statement to the Justice Department that they've returned everything. And then the Justice Department learns that that is not true. And that promoted a breach of trust between these two parties, and I think led to the execution of the search warrant. And we still don't know whether the government has received back all the classified and top secret information that they know could be missing. We obviously know they got a lot back. They have a ton of material right now. They have a filter team going through it, but there could even be more. And so I think we're just, even though some major actions have happened in this case, I think we are in some ways not at the end of it, and there is more to come.
And let me ask you, just sit with you for a second, Luke. Where was Mark Meadows this whole time? Because, I mean, when this stuff was removed, Trump was still president. He still had a team. He still had a chief of staff named Mark Meadows. There is some reporting that he was sort of MIA for a lot of this period. What do we know about what he was doing and whether he was involved in getting this stuff moved?
Well, we have to put this in context. We know both Donald Trump and Mark Meadows were consumed with Donald Trump staying in office. So they were, in the weeks after he lost the election, they were busy putting together schemes of fake electors, and they were coming with plans for January 6th to have a big rally and put pressure on Congress. And so there wasn't a lot of emphasis or a spotlight on records retention or proper policies. You mentioned that the Obama administration turned everything over to the archives. The archives actually put them in special facilities where he could review them, but he didn't take them with him as he left. Now, Mark Meadows was assuring people within the White House that he was going to handle everything. It would all be done properly. But clearly that was not the case. And so, some of those assurances Mark Meadows made to administration officials who could have been helping Donald Trump unload these boxes or carry them around with him, those could come under scrutiny as the Justice Department continues to investigate.
Tim O'Brien, let me bring you in here because you have followed Donald Trump for a really long time. Because there is a contradiction here in what we just heard, Luke Broadwater talking about Donald Trump and Mark Meadows being consumed with the idea of trying to stay in office and doing everything they can to try to not leave, and boxing up materials and taking them away and taking them to Mar-a-Lago, which is a strange thing to do if you think you're going to still be president. You think there's some opportunity that you're going to stay, which he's been telling his followers the whole time. What do you make of the idea that he took this away? There have been some theories thrown out there as to why he did it. Do you have one?
Well, I mean, it's all speculation at this point, Joy. I think that, you'd have to get inside his head to talk about motive. But I think there clearly have been patterns in his presidency and his business life that we can draw on to suggest why Donald Trump holds on to things that he really wants. Some of it is he's got a little boy's fascination with the trappings of the presidency. He was very fascinated with the retrofitting of Air Force One. He wanted to hold on to a model of Air Force One that apparently he was required to turn over to the National Archives. So there's that kind of juvenile fascination with it, and who really cares? None of that affects the national security. It's just part of his flaws as a person. I think the more salient factors that might have motivated him, and I think are damaging, dangerous, and should concern law enforcement and the American public, is whether or not money was a factor. Did he believe he was taking things from the federal government that he could use to feather his own nest? He was looking at other people in his administration, like Jared Kushner or Steve Mnuchin, cash in on their relationship to the Saudis. The Saudis have given billions to both of those men for startup investment management firms that probably wouldn't have drawn that kind of money but for their proximity to the Trump administration. I think Trump saw that kind of thing going on and had to wonder himself about how he could monetize his ex-presidency. So were there documents that he took from the government that he thought that he could monetize in some fashion? I think the other reason.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
Go ahead. No, you go. Well, I think the other reason is that he wanted government documents that might help perpetuate a cover-up. Donald Trump was impeached twice. He was impeached the first time for trying to strong-arm Ukraine's president Zelensky to dig up dirt on Biden. Are there any communiques with foreign leaders like Zelensky or Xi or Putin that Trump didn't want to get out into the open. Again, this is raw speculation, but it is rational speculation. And we also know that the FBI were concerned about nuclear documents he took. So there's a national security issue here as well. So these are very good reasons behind why the FBI would want to take a look at this, lock it down. But until they provide more transparency, the FBI, either by prosecuting Trump or clarifying what's in the documents, this is going to be just raw speculation.